Ahoj, tak všichni online?
Já jo.
Taky.
A ty, babi?
Babi,
musíš tam na to kliknout. Ne, na to
babi,
druhý.
musíš tam na tu ikonku.
Sluchátko, babi.
Jeden svět, festival dokumentárních filmů o lidských právech. 10. května až 6. června Jeden svět CZ pořádá Člověk v tísni.
Dobrý večer, vážení.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Štěpán Sedláček, and I welcome all of you to the 23rd edition of One World. We are going to have a Q&A session after the screening of a film organized by human rights organization People in Need. We are going to talk about the film called Once Upon a Time in Venezuela, and we are having here Anabel Rodriguez Rios and Daniel Cooper Bermudez. He represents the human rights organization Hearts on Venezuela. Welcome to both of you. Good evening.
Hi, hello, good evening.
A pleasure to be here.
Dříve než se pustíme do
Prior to asking first questions, I have a couple of housewarming remarks. You can ask questions via 3 different ways. Either you can use the Slido application, where on your screens QR codes should be popping up on your screens, or you can ask your questions via Facebook, and finally via YouTube, where it's probably easier for you because you can just ask questions in the commentaries section below. We're looking forward to your questions. We believe that you're eager to learn more about the current situation in Venezuela. You can ask about anything that caught your attention when you watched the film. Anabel, tell us, your film shows the gradual decline of Congo Mirador, built on the Maracaibo Lagoon. This story is linked to a number of environmental issues because the lake is more and more engulfed by plants and mud, full of oil, and also the local communities are undermined by the activities of local and regional governments, which fail to satisfy their basic living needs. So how are they holding up? What's the current situation after the shooting? Did anyone stay in the village, or everybody left? Because that's what's the final impression I got from the documentary.
Yes. Well, thanks for having us here, and it is a pleasure to talk with you guys. Well, by the way, I'm right now in Caracas, and we just came back from traveling to Congo Mirador to see exactly this question, which is, what happened to the people there? For a couple of years, the film was shot until 2018. And for a couple of years, there were left approximately 4 or 5 people, all of them old. Still, right now, when I went there were about 3 families, full families, working in the fishing business, and the only left of the village as a communication to the lake, which is the source of the fish, is only one channel, and 1 and 2 other small canals, I would say, in which just very shallow boats can go. But still, I had the impression it was quite iconic to see what was happening there, because it is a bit of what I perceive is happening in the rest of the country, which is that the people that are left, that cannot go or that prefer to stay, are still going, even though the conditions in the case of Congo Mirador are mainly tough conditions. For instance, the keeping of this channel is is kept by the same people with shovels, you know, and whatever they have, they are trying to keep this channel. And actually, the first thing that we were told as soon as we jumped into one of these houses that looked derelict and abandoned, was that we found this couple of very old fishermen, and they were saying, people are told that here there's no one left, and they are not even sending us, you know, that there are this subsidized food that is sent via bags or boxes and so on. And they were saying, well, they are not even bringing these boxes of food, and they are saying that there's no one here. And one of the guys that was with us in this visit, he's a guy from Congo Mirador, and he shot the film with us, and he was telling them, well, keep screaming that you exist and that you're still there. So I take this long story to signify that something that I am perceiving is happening in this country, which is that even though the conditions, I mean, the state as such, there is an abandonment from the state in many levels, people are taking in their hands the role of the state. And actually, yeah, I mean, people are just taking on. And this is the current situation in Congo Mirador. We are even thinking in doing a sequel, but let's see what happens.
Tak máme informace, úplně čerstvé informace.
Thank you. According to Annabelle, we've seen what's the freshest information from the village. Now, Daniel, tell us about yourself, because you come from the region, even though currently you are in Florida. So tell us, what were your impressions after watching the film, because you know what the situation was a couple of years ago in the region. So tell us, do you think it is really an iconic story reflecting what is happening in Venezuela as a whole? And could you maybe talk more about the whole region surrounding the lake in the north of Venezuela?
Yeah, of course. Thank you again for the invitation. My name is Daniel Cooper Bermudez, and I am a human rights defender in Venezuela. I've only been outside of Venezuela for a week now. And before that, I was in Maracaibo, which is the capital of the state of Zulia, where the film was produced. And the first impression that me and a lot of my other friends who work in the human rights field received from the film was that it was the story of Venezuela, of what like so many of us lived through different experiences, the slow decay, the empty promises, and until everything that we knew that was our society changed. And that's also a little bit of why I'm now in the United States, is because what used to be home is now in certain ways unrecognizable, and that beautiful and at the same time painful way of portraying it in the film was also cathartic, in the sense of having a art express, have that medium of expression to let out those feelings and see our story being told. And we really appreciated that from people who do human rights work, to have that story being told and see ourselves recognized in that story. And to say a little bit more about Zulia, it's my home state, so it's the place where I call home and that I love, and where all my family and my communities are from. It's the most populous state in Venezuela. It's to the west of the country, and it borders Colombia, and it is one of the main oil producing and cattle producing areas in the country. And it is also home to the second largest city in the country, where I am from, called Maracaibo. And for many years, the situation with the lake for over 40 years, the Congo Mirador is one of the situation with the Congo Mirador is one of the more important things that is happening around the lake. But in general, the Lake Maracaibo has been collapsed by a lot of oil spills, which have for over 40 years created an environmental disaster for our region and for the lake, which is really big. But even a few weeks ago, when I was going to the lake for some activities, if you go in the lake and if you go barefoot, you will literally come out with like oil on your feet. So that is the extent of the environmental disaster that is happening in the lake, and it's part of the whole culture of impunity that is happening in Venezuela. That the state does not take responsibility for anything that is going on.
Ten snímek sleduje osudy vícero lidí, ale asi ty dvě hlavní postavy, to je představitelka vlády a ctitelka Hugo Chávez, Tamara, a na té druhé straně je to učitelka Natalie, která vlastně sympatizuje nebo je členkou opozice.
Actually sympathizes with the opposition.
Všichni tam mluvili velmi otevřeně.
Both of them were really open. You didn't need to explain anything because they gave their views. They were really scenes that spoke volumes.
Se tam vlastně
For example,
plácení.
We see bribes quite openly depicted. And we have one question from the audience about this. Good evening, thank you for the film. And please, could you explain how you managed to gain the trust of Tamara to explain about the bribes and so on? So was it difficult for you to gain their trust?
Well, what has to do with the bribe in itself, what I consider the actual drama of it is that it was quite naturalized in the way elections were and have been. I would say this is something quite common in the elections all over the country in different intensities or openness, but this happens. In the case of Congo Mirador and in that election, it was simply an open fact. That actually, what I perceived is that it was more as a sign of leadership or a force, or so then there was even a bit of a pride in showing that the work is being done. So then I consider that like the worrying factor because it's when this kind of behavior becomes, when the corruption becomes culture, and I think that we relate to that, and that's the case of in these elections. In general, for us to begin to record with Tamara, it took us quite a while. All in all, we were there working during 5 years. Not continuously, but going 3-4 times a year, every time between 2 weeks and 1 month, living in the place. And out of that, the first 2 years, we really had no relationship with Tamara, mainly because of the same polarization, and because of circumstances, mainly because we lost the place the house where we were staying did move away from the village, so we had nowhere to stay in the conditions. I mean, we even though we were living there, we tried to arrange the environment of the film crew in a way that was, under certain health parameters. So Tamara's house was ideal for it, and actually she does host people there. And so then we did ask her if she could host us, and then that's the way we began to have a relationship. So, and it was like that. However, right now that we've been showing the film in Venezuela, we are beginning to show it out after having gone into cinemas, and it's in digital platforms and so on. But we are trying to reach communities and so on, and we began by doing so in Maracaibo, in Daniel City, in a wonderful theater called Teatro Baral, which is the theater in which the first film in Venezuela was shown. And here the cinema began in the same time as in the States, because it was a time of lots of, this oil boom that brought so much money into this country. So she didn't want to come, by the way, because even though we have not had the opportunity to show her the whole film in one go, but through streamings and so on. But the talk of the people, she has the impression that she's the bad one. So then we have a tremendous, ethical discussion to have with her, but I hope that there's going to be a point in which we're working for it, to have a presentation in which is safe enough for us to have a conversation with her.
Na Tamaru tady cílí několik dotazů.
We have a couple of questions about Tamara.
Když jste tam teď byla,
so you recently went to
viděli jste se,
Congo?
Co se vlastně stalo s Tamarou?
Have you met her? What is her destiny? What is her life now?
Yeah, Tamara did move. Well, I'm going to talk about the people in general as well, people of the film. Tamara had moved to a house in a small city within 3 hours of boat ride. This city is called Santa Barbara. And she lives. Her profile is been reduced to the minimum, in the sense that she has no leadership. Still, even though she's living there, she's still taking care of certain things of this practically abandoned village. So even though she has she lost this environment of leadership, and is living alone in this city in a house, and with a economical profile that is low, but it's not the worst actually. Actually, she has a couple of public transport, small like cars for doing public transport in Santa Barbara. So she has a little bit of a business there. Still, she's taking care of certain things of the village. For instance, there is this antenna for cell phones, and there is a piece that she's been bringing there. There is still one thread of functioning within this disintegrated community. The teacher, even though this was not in the question, but I find this interesting and quite representative on how vulnerability is. The teacher, when she left to what is one of the last village above the water, with a culture of mixed people, not indigenous but mixed people, and this place is called Dologas. And she was teaching there for a while, and the school was closed within between the crisis, between the deep humanitarian, etc. crisis and the pandemic, because that's the coalition of things that is happening here, which makes it quite catastrophic. And the fact is that the oil, the petrol, is a tremendous issue in the country right now. And in the lake, the price of the oil can reach even. I bought for $3 1 liter of petrol, and in the lake itself it can rise even more. So because of that, that school was closed, of that last village of above the water. So then she was left without a job and looked for a job within the river in a farm, and got together with one guy that looks after the farm, a little bit for survival, I would say. And right now she's from one day to the other about to give birth to another child, because I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not very good to say it's unfortunate to be pregnant, but in this case, it's a hardcore situation because it makes her and her daughter even more vulnerable in an area that is quite plagued by paramilitarism. So lots of people are in this situation, they are left without the main, is left without a culture, left without means of making a living, without any assistance, without any protection from a state or a government. And the child, in her case, her child, the one that you see in the film, who is a beautiful, bright girl, is been left out of the scholar system, even though she wants to study. So that's their situation right now. And finally, the little girl, Joaine, she's called. She's living in a slum in Maracaibo called San Francisco, within San Francisco, which is an area of Maracaibo. There are these places that are really precarious, and is a young woman of 17 years old, without education, and in a really living from the charity of her aunties and so on, because the father really doesn't take care of her. And and just to close a little bit the idea, we as a film crew, we have an open collect for the people that it has been in the film. And within that, we have been able to support, well, first of all, emergencies, because there's been, for instance, kids with tuberculosis and so on, and then we are looking after these emergencies. But as well, in the case of the teacher, for instance, she has this idea. The moment she has the pregnancy itself, which is costly. But as well, she has this idea of making a small business and so on. And through this crowdfunding, or however we want to call it, we are trying to do some action there of primary support. And I am mentioning this, well, first of all, to let it know to the audience, but as well to illustrate on how Venezuelan society is working. We are doing work of people for the people. And this is massive. It's amazing how many organizations of all kind of sizes have proliferated in this time, in which we are all trying to help each other. And this, I think, is as well another feature that is in this sense of that the people are taking the state in their hands. We're doing this kind of actions.
Díky, slyšeli jste.
Thank you, Annabelle. We've heard about the different stories of the individual protagonists. That was very edifying. Thank you. And now to you, Daniel, tell us more about the oil industry, because oil has been the major commodity, a major source of finance for the whole country. And while the price is high for the locals, it is very quite low for other countries. What I'd like to know is whether the region of Maracaibo could harness in the past the potential of oil, and whether this has changed.
The oil industry in Venezuela has changed dramatically. So after the prices fell drastically a couple of years ago, the government had not made sustainable investments and had chosen to, one, spend it in ways that were not sustainable with large social programs, which at the moment had large-scale impact, but were not cared for in their sustainability to be able to become more institutional programs, and through corruption. And there's fantastic investigative pieces on the extent of the corruption, and Venezuela's current is constantly ranked year after year as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. So even after that decline in oil prices, the oil industry locally was already suffering from a lot of economic mismanagement and corruption. And after that, the sanctions also worsened the access to some of the oil markets. And nowadays, there has been a little bit more access, especially through Iran. So the oil, a lot of the gasoline that we get, which is refined, we get from Iran, because ironically, we're an oil producing country that we don't produce oil for ourselves. We sell most of it to other countries that have refineries because our oil is thick. So it requires refining technology that we no longer have. We used to have it at some point. And the oil that we get from Iran is very dirty. It's often comes in bad quality. So often when people can get oil, people who can afford to get oil, it often messes with the motors in the cars. And right now in Maracaibo, for example, there is almost no access to oil. Before, just a week ago, there was the longest oil lines to tank up in gasoline that I have seen in probably my entire life. People waiting for 48 hours and even more just to get oil in their tanks for extremely high prices. And there's also a black market, because oil is so scarce, that there's a black market of people who have, family members in the police or military officials who work at the gas station, supposedly to guarantee safety and security of the gas stations. But what they really do is they get some of that oil and sell it on the black market for 3 or 4 times the price, which is supposed to be. So the oil industry, in terms of its capacity to produce, is very much declined, and it does not seem to have the prospect of what at some point we hoped would be a growth in the oil industry. So the economic prospects for Venezuela, now folks in civil society and experts are looking at other ways to rehabilitate the economy that aren't as oil dependent.
Interesting. I have one more question from the audience, which is the following. What do you think is the main opportunity for improvement of the situation in the region? Corruption, education, poverty, environment. It's a really comprehensive issue. What do you think that should be the first step?
Well, I came with the same question 3 months ago. I've been for 3 months already. Normally, I live in Vienna, so I'm having a kind of a fresh before. I didn't come before the pandemic. That was 1.5 years ago. And what really stands out for me is, and I repeat the same idea, is the capacity of the people to respond to such a situation. And I think people began already. The impression I have is that there is a country coming underground. It's amazing. Within the circumstances, within the many limitations, that in some cases become really, they really affect your existence itself. But people are reacting here. And there is a kind of an, it's like the anarchist ideas are somehow beginning to function. I find quite interesting how people are organizing themselves for dealing with their situations, which is not something new, I would say, but it's quite general. Everywhere I'm perceiving such a thing, and personally, as a citizen, I have my own faith there, in the capacities that people are having. In the political, more like parties and political level, and in the agreement of the country itself, there is another story. It's difficult to say. I perceive that people are functioning beside those agreements, and really just trying to go on with their lives, but not only surviving, mainly surviving, yes, of course, but there is as well a creative activity. Case of Congo Mirador, for instance, most of them, they have to go, lose their main, most of them, they become practically slaves when they have to work as fishermen somewhere else in the lake, or when they have to go to Colombia. When people have to go to Colombia without a source of income or a job, etc., the situation is really tough. So there is these people that are remaining there. It's as if they are taking whichever way, trying to take their lives, and that I find quite interesting. How people are trying to still to function without a classic leadership. But well, of course, this is one vision. I don't know, Daniel, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think right now a lot of people in Venezuela don't have the expectation of short-term significant political and social change. So what at least we do in civil society is try to build the capacity so that civil society can keep existing in Venezuela. So NGOs, journalists, independent journalists, and other actors within civil society, like unions and professional associations, which are still existing in Venezuela, and a lot of them are still very active. We want to maintain the space so that these forces in civil society can continue to grow and expand, and that energy that, as Anabel is mentioning, that is coming up from above, that it can be channeled through institutional and organizational efforts that complement the social fabric to have some sort of advocacy within the state. And what we have to do is a kind of both like classic form of activism, both social and political, but also this kind of cultural activism of, well, evaluating, and which is part of what Anabel is saying that has been occurring in the country, evaluating, well, what do we need to do to survive? What do we need to do to change our circumstances now that we have been completely abandoned by the state, or the state is putting obstacle after obstacle for us to have any kind of quality of life or just get by with the basic possibilities. So it really is amazing that solidarity amongst Venezuelans has become more of a habit than I think ever before. I think there was already a good culture of solidarity, but the practice has become more constant. And I think for those of us who practice activism in Venezuela, we also are ready to have like a medium-term and long-term perspective of what has to be done. And I think that also alleviates us from the necessity of having to bring change now, even though it is very necessary, but to at least work towards some steps that can alleviate the suffering, like the World Food Program, which we had been demanding the United Nations enter with the World Food Program so that people can be nourished, and especially children, to address child malnutrition, which is at very high levels. The World Food Program in 2019 brought out an assessment that said that 32% of Venezuelans were in need of humanitarian assistance due to the food insecurity. So right now, just a couple of months ago, the World Food Program announced that it signed an agreement with the government to give food, provide food in schools in public schools to 1.5 million children. Mm-hmm. And that is something that a lot of folks don't see all the work that went behind that, but it is that like slow activism that allowed for that to happen with time. So Venezuela, being an activist in Venezuela can be very frustrating. Being just a citizen in Venezuela is very frustrating, but to see that little by little our work has been able to have an impact. And similarly with the fact-finding mission in the United Nations, which published significant reports on crimes against humanity occurring. And now, just recently, just last week, a case that I had supported in my human rights work of a young man who was sexually tortured in the 2017 protests. We finally were able to have the 8 policemen who were responsible be charged for those crimes. So that is literally the work of years and years and years of fighting injustice, of working both nationally and internationally to put pressure on the people who don't care to have justice, so that they feel at least a little bit of pressure, at least a little bit of heat, so that something can change. So these little victories aren't an indication of generally what is happening, unfortunately, but we have to keep building and we have to keep believing that eventually we can come out of the situation.
There is one detail that I'd like to take the opportunity to comment this, because I think that for us and especially for the activists, is essential the cooperation with other similar organizations in the world. This network of people working for human rights in the world are probably the ones that somehow can guarantee certain protection, because as Danielle is describing, the NGOs especially are being harassed here by the state. Especially in the last days, there's been something which is tremendous, which is that the organizations have to register here in an office that deals with terrorism. And then you have to register, according to the law, you have to register there and to say where your donations come from and where they go to. And well, this network of the civil society reacted to that, and they are back. The government is backed up in some of the aspects, but the connection to the public opinion international, or to the connection with the civil society internationally, is essential for dealing with these pressures that are coming from different sides. And this is actually probably one of the biggest challenges, because the country, it is actually and literally taken over by the military, as a police state. So this is a bit of this is the stake is in the game for the people.
Venezuela se potýká už
Venezuela has been facing a crisis, a political crisis and an economic one
ztratili možná část naděje a odešli
and maybe some people have already lost hope and left for foreign countries. At the same time, there is the pandemic that struck, and this is the subject of one of the other questions. What is the health crisis in Venezuela, and is it worsened by COVID-19?
The health crisis in Venezuela is dire. The hospitals are in no situation to attend the pandemic, and if you analyze the measures that have been applied in Venezuela, they have been a lot more strict than most of the world, because the government is conscious that it cannot handle that the pandemic become a lot worse than it already is. And the numbers we know are severely underreported, just like the deaths are. And that has already been a practice that was institutionalized when for years we were alarming the international community that there was a lot of children dying due to malnutrition. But in the public hospitals, they would not put as a cause of death, or in the report of the death, of the certificate of death, they would not report that the child was malnourished. They would say they died because of other diseases that were a consequence of the malnourishment. So for already quite some time, the state has been really perfecting those ways of hiding what is happening with hiding the numbers of how many people are dying and how many people are being affected by the health crisis. So just in Zulia, where the film was produced, the hospitals do not have adequate PPE, personal protective equipment. And the commission for the Human Rights Commission for the state of Zulia, CODES, which you can find this information online as well, they support the renal patients who are undergoing dialysis in the largest public hospital in Venezuela, which is the University Hospital in Maracaibo. And the elevator there, they receive dialysis treatment like in the 9th floor. This is just an anecdote to show you what a normal patient goes through in the public system. And they have to go through the 9th floor, and all of the floors in the bottom are attending COVID-19 patients, and the elevator regularly breaks. So they have to push the people with wheelchairs up 9 floors of stairs in a situation in which people don't have enough often to have their masks on, or there's security health personnel who don't have the proper equipment. And Venezuela is one of the countries in the world with the highest rate of health personnel who have died of COVID-19 relative to the percentage of total deaths. So that has been very worrisome, that the health personnel in Venezuela are not receiving the adequate support to address the pandemic, which has worsened all of the material conditions in hospitals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing to add. I mean, we all go through. All the Venezuelans were going through this situation in one way or another. When there is in the family a patient of cancer, for instance, I mean, this could mean, because people are trapped in between the lack of infrastructure and basic attention, and as the economy has been freed to the dollars in cash, there is a totally crazy economy internally, and there is, of course, the possibility of going to clinics with prices that are really unreachable for, of course, by most of the population. There is still an elite that can reach those, and people are trapped in between these two totally contradictory worlds, and people are simply dying. It's the impression I have. People are just simply dying of several illnesses because of lack of possibility of having the right treatment for them, or because of neglectancy of the doctors or lack of the structure. I mean, all these things together mean at the end that people simply die.
Tak doufejme, že si Venezuelané brzy
that Venezuelans will be able to take a breath soon and the situation will get better because they have suffered a lot in recent years. We have some more questions from the audience, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So let's move to the conclusion of our debate. I would like to thank you for being here. And if you want to add something, say one last word, feel free to say it about the film or about Venezuela in general.
Well, but first of all, thank you very much to this festival. I got to say one word. I attended at some point, and we have so many dear friends in the city, filmmakers. Actually, this film, there was one filmmaker, Katerina, I'm going to try to pronounce this well, Prubova, Katerina Prubova. She was our editing consultant. She's a brilliant editor, and I want to thank her in case, Katerina, you see this discussion. And it's a very dear, very, very dear festival for us filmmakers and for me personally. And I really appreciate that you keep on doing this super quality work for humanity. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for the invitation. Anabel, also thank you for producing such a great film that has reached all these levels internationally. And well, if anybody is interested in following more current information on what is happening in Venezuela in English, you could visit heartsonvenezuela.com, and we publish work that is translated into English directly written by civil society organizations. So you can keep up to date with what's happening in Venezuela.
Díky.
Thank you very much.
Na závěr bych také rád poděkoval
britskému velvyslanectví v Praze, the British Embassy in Prague, which supported this screening and the debate.
Venezuele, a samozřejmě bych rád poděkoval také vám, našim divákům a divačkám. Děkuji za vaše dotazy,
for your questions, for your involvement, for finding or for devoting your time to learn about the events in Venezuela and about human rights. Enjoy your evening and see you again for another debate